Hey, this is Lexi,
This is Ari,
and you're listening to
Hotel Earth. Hi, we'd like to extend our stay.
and Upgrade.
Welcome back to this month's book club discussion of George Orwell's 1984.
So I pulled basically like three main themes, I think is like the best way to describe them, regarding environmentalism in this read. And the first one that I think relates, they all relate to what you were just talking about, but the one that is most maybe like on the nose, but not as specific in its example that I'm going to give, is how environmental degradation is almost synonymous with unchecked power. So in 1984, the party has shaped a society that is completely devoid of critical thought and responsibility for its surroundings. We've I think talked about that and described it pretty well here. And it talks about this constant production because war is consumptive. Like when we experienced World War I and II, especially World War II in the United States, we saw industry explode. And I don't want to speak like it in this. I don't want to say World War II saved us from the Great Depression. In some ways, I would argue, though, that our economic stability correlated with World War II's industrial boom.
Post-World War II economic boom, baby. Everyone was
Plastic.
wealthy and happy.
Let's harken back to the plastic of it all. If you don't know what I'm talking about, go watch season 1 of Hotel Earth. But also it's the fact that when you have this like unfettered consumption and production, you also have pollution. And pollution wasn't talked about in this book directly.
Yeah.
But I think, one example that I just recently was doing a significant amount of research on is industry polluting in the name of war our natural resources and how everlasting that pollution actually is. I'm thinking specifically of outside of the city of Syracuse in the state of New York, there is a lake, Onondaga Lake. And not only is this area rife with environmental justice issues because it was supposed to be sovereign territory of Onondaga Nation, and it's not anymore, if you catch my drift. That lake was so heavily polluted that there were not only fishing bans, there still are fishing bans, but there were swimming bans. And like the air quality, the water quality was heavily polluted in the name of industry. And it took basically 100 years for the United States state and federal government to pull their heads out of the sand and be like, hey, that's bad. Like, people are sick. There's issues with fishing. There's issues with like insert basically anything you could relate to the environment being degraded. But it was perfectly fine for it to be degraded during wartime. People didn't seem to have any issues. My grandma grew up swimming in that lake.
Well, exactly. And because war justifies the means, doesn't it? Like war.
Yes.
That's the whole the tie-in here is that perpetual war means that resource like having access, people having access to natural resources is not the priority. The priority is safety. The priority is winning the war, even though we're maybe not even trying to win it. So we're trying to perpetuate it for whatever reason. But
of course you don't say it's a perpetual war.
Of course not. There's gonna be an end to this and life is gonna be good again. But in the meantime, I need all hands on deck. You know, that's
Yeah.
the rhetoric.
It is. And I guess that sort of leads into this theme I'm going to bring up again in a little bit when I talk about when we talk about climate change, but environmentalism in that realm, the manipulation, the party's manipulation and control of the world, so to speak. Like in 1984, you've got these three superpower states, and they control basically each a third of the world. And it's described how they are all so equally powerful that they will never actually beat one another. There's
Yep.
just like minor moves in territory boundaries and occasional switches in who controls masses of people who are basically described as the perpetual workforce. They don't
It's like global south / equatorial region that even to this day is still an ongoing conversation of how developed world will treat and abuse that world.
yeah, I mean it's worth just pointing out that some of the most resource rich places in the world are the most
Oppressed.
oppressed. I was trying to think of the best word to use, but oppressed is probably most appropriate. And then I guess as an addition to that description, considered underdeveloped. You know, like these are places that have not experienced the Industrial Revolution in the same way that the United States did 120 years ago. But they're the most resource-rich places. Like, you know, that's where we're getting the resources from. So are we
they're
not?
colonies
Are we
of
not paying for
said
it?
they're colonies of said Western states.
Even if not explicitly
If not
described
explicitly.
as such. And that sort of goes towards this idea of the party's manipulation and control of the world. I think the biggest, like if I had to describe this, the message in 3 words, I would say perception is reality. The whole premise of this book is whoever controls what we perceive, how we perceive it, controls what reality actually is. And that's what they say very explicitly ish. They describe it a little differently. O'Brien tells Winston, whoever controls the past controls the future. And that's true. Like whoever has the narrative on their side and controls the way that the narrative is then perpetuated, controls the way that everyday people perceive the past, and thus that colors the way they see the future. There's no like substitutions that need to be made to compare that to today's society and also just human nature generally, because like the party is constantly rewriting history. Winston's whole job is to rewrite history every single day, day in and day out. Even the most minuscule of stories, they rewrite them. And it gets to the point where basically like Winston doesn't know, we don't know as the reader. I don't even think Orwell necessarily would say like he knew what actually was the past. What actually was the reality. It's been so warped and rewritten that nobody could probably tell you what actually happened, because how could you even rely on the information in your mind? Like, it's very scary to have that be the reality, actually, ironically. Like, they rewrite boot manufacturing and agricultural reports. So you don't even know.
They rewrite the inventors of big, like, what's the word I'm looking for? Discoveries.
Yeah, gravity. I don't think that's necessarily the thing, but like,
well,
gravity-esque.
Yeah,
things.
they would even talk about like who the first inventor was of the airplane. And
yes,
they would say, for example, that Oceana was the proud inventor of the airplane in this year. And Winston can remember that that's not true, but he doesn't remember who really was or what year. Like, it's just one example, but yeah.
Yeah. And Julia is basically like, who gives a rat's patootie who invented the airplanes? Like, there are these squeezing feelings of like, okay, well, what actually does matter? And I think that just like further plays into the discomfort of it all and the oppression. Like, you don't even necessarily know what matters at this point because everything feels
Yeah. That
off.
was
Like, it's very hard to feel tethered to reality.
I couldn't agree more. And that kind of conflict with deciding what to count that matters in your fight and what doesn't, it can
Yeah.
get really overwhelming because you
Yeah.
at that point, well, how do you organize yourself to know which things to keep track of in your personal rebellion, right? Like that is, and then when there's no
What is the
record of it,
Brotherhood actually what is the Brotherhood actually fighting? Like, how do you even know what you're fighting against?
yeah,
What does the Brotherhood stand for? Even when they give you like Orwell authors chapters of the Brotherhood's book into 1984, and even then Winston basically is like, none of this is information I didn't already know. Like, they're not telling me new information. So you just constantly have this like this feeling of not knowing. And like the party in 1984 changes who they're at war with. You know, like sometimes it's East Asia and sometimes it's Eurasia, but always, no matter what, whoever they say they're at war with, they've always been at war with them. So then you
uh-huh.
have this like, ooh, so were we mad at East Asia? No, we couldn't have been. So it's like this example of doublethink.
Yep. And
And he's
sorry, I was just going to draw a real life parallel right there. How many times have we seen that exact messaging in I'm not saying like they erase the past maybe like they do in 1984, at least not yet. But we see it all the time. The 1980 war, Iran-Iraq, the US was supporting Iraq in that war. Fast forward to 2003, we're at war with Iraq now. They've always been, what do you mean? It's Iraq. They've always been the enemy. You ask your average person if the United States has ever knowingly been in cahoots with Iraq. Like, the general, like, rhetoric is that it's always been an enemy. And so we see this guy, like, we see this already. We have been for years.
Yeah. And in some senses, I'm like, okay, there has to be veils of, let's say, separation between what positions of power know versus what the masses know. And in some ways, I feel like that can cause some conflict between what we see in the media versus like what actually is happening. So I'll give that the grace. But Orwell's writing demonstrates the party's ability and objective to manipulate all information as it sees fit for whatever reason. And by distorting reality, no one can actually truly know the state of any one aspect of the environment. So, while not specifically addressed, a comparison to today is the danger of not having access to accurate historical records. How much rainfall did we have in the last 10 years? What were the temperatures in the 1960s and 70s? How many trees were actually felled in that forest? Like, all of this information and having access to it publicly, especially, is actually really important because we can't have people doing research and creating data to actually protect us, I might add, if we don't have access to it. And who controls a lot of this information, at least in the United States, is our federal government, because our federal government historically helped to fund this information because it is important and keeps us safe. And I won't like dive too far off the deep end on that. I think that like actually pretty well summarizes my concerns there. That kind of leads into this like third and final theme I at least pulled on environmentalism, which is nature as a symbol of freedom and individuality. This is a dystopian society, right? Like 1984, we can agree, is a dystopian society. The party, which is led by Big Brother, exerts total control over every aspect of life. As we've said, and as the book kind of alludes to, they even want to control like your thoughts and
Oh,
your
yeah.
emotions.
Thought
Like, that
police.
is their goal. And
Yeah.
as we think about it in, like, this context, there are a few places where Winston finds sanctuary from like, the prying eyes of Big Brother, or does he? You know, like, there's always that, like, that lingering sense of, can you actually trust
Yeah.
your surroundings, which is the point, right? Like,
Yeah.
if you can't even trust your surroundings, how can you trust your own thoughts? Blah, blah, blah. But, like, the first time we fought, like, the first instance of finding, like, reprieve from the prying eye is in this secluded woodland where he and Julia first go to meet. And there is, like, this feeling there in the secluded woodland that the two seem to experience a sense of freedom and autonomy, which I don't know if this is necessarily true, but from what Orwell writes, it seems like this is the first time in Winston's adult life that he has found any space capable of providing privacy at
Yeah.
all. And even then, we're not 100% sure. He's not even 100% sure if the privacy existed there. But I think we can draw the comparison to just like human nature, that we do find privacy and seclusion and, like, in nature. Like, there are
I mean,
documented experiences
yeah.
of that in the real world. And I
I
think
don't
that
even.
is, like, very pointedly what Orwell is trying to articulate in that space.
That is such an interesting kind of piece that you pulled out from that book, and tying it in to the environmental conversation, because I do think call me crazy, call us crazy, call us loons. The Our ability to express individual thought and to contemplate at all, to meditate with our thoughts, to be with our thoughts, comes from moments when we're able to actually be and actually sit and actually have the literal space to do so. And for a lot of people, that comes from nature, that comes from access to green spaces, that comes from parks, that comes from views to awe at. I mean, Henry David Thoreau, maybe, or John Muir, perhaps wrote this in literature better than I could ever express. But it is a fundamental aspect to human nature, and I believe the expression of self. I'm not saying it's necessarily the same for everybody. I'm sure people can do the same things staring at four white walls. Okay. I think it'd be a little easier for you if you had a green space to do it in. But wow, what a profound thing that you pulled from that. That scene in the book I wouldn't have even thought of in this conversation. I'm really glad you brought it up, because I totally I see it. I see the parallel that you're drawing.
And it's unfortunate that in the book, we don't really have a clear sense of, like, how free to move people necessarily are. But from that scene, it does convey the idea that no one's really enjoying this natural space. Like, they have hikes that they go out on as, like, a privilege. So clearly there is some sort of, like, exploitation of nature in the name of party objectives. Only the special, it kind of seems like, actually have access to go on these expeditions and hikes through nature, which is a resource that everyone should have access to. So there is that, like, not really explored idea, but it's pointed out as existing here. Like, whoever controls the nature also controls people's ability to have that quiet space to contemplate. Which is how Julia even found it in the first place, and was able to bring Winston there for them to have their initial rendezvous. And I know that I kind of, like, quickly went through it, but I think the party's manipulation and control of the world as it relates to resources, like that real life comparison that I made comes up really prominently in the climate conversation, especially because I shouldn't say that. I shouldn't say nowhere else do I see this like so strongly placed, but climate change specifically is one of the most clear examples to me of people in positions of power manipulating information. So, in the context of climate change, there are active efforts to distort scientific findings, to spread information, and to downplay the severity of the issue. I am not trying to plug more of what we do here necessarily. Like, I'm not trying to have like ulterior motives in bringing this up. But please, if you have not already, you need to go and look at the call to action blog post that we just released, I think, early August timeframe, about how the Environmental Protection Agency, the U.S. like federal arm of protecting our health and safety from environmental degradation, proposed to repeal the endangerment finding, which is the literal legal basis for the federal government to be able to protect us from air pollution that causes climate change. Like, it's in the way that the federal government is like going about this repeal is by describing it as an Obama era initiative, that it's no longer needed, which is ironic because at the end of July, the international justice, what is the court in The Hague, the international court basically came out and said that not preventing climate change and by subsidizing fossil fuels, you are basically committing a crime. Like, because we know it is not a matter of opinion. It is not a difference in interpretation. Climate change is being caused by anthropogenic burning of fossil fuels. Period. So for our Environmental Protection Agency to come out and be like, we want to throw out the legal basis that says that exact thing, the science that we did to show that correlation and causation, it's not even a correlation anymore, it's causation, we want to just get rid of it. Like, this is a clear example of doublethink and contradictory beliefs IRL, like in the very real world. The concept of doublethink, we've talked about it, but like, let's be very clear. It refers to the ability to simultaneously accept two contradictory beliefs as true. In the book, they talk about how 2 + 2 sometimes equals 5. Like, that it equals 4, but sometimes it also equals 3 and 2 and any other variation of numbers that the party sees fit, the people in control. So, like, we talked about an unperson. Someone that is vaporized never existed. But how would you know they were vaporized if they never existed? You have to simultaneously accept that someone never existed to be able to say that they were vaporized.
Yep.
Like,
Yep.
That's how that works. So then applying it to climate change, we have discussed similar patterns in the climate debate. Sometimes people, like the U.S. federal government, will acknowledge the reality of climate change while simultaneously supporting actions that contribute to it or deny the scientific consensus, i.e. what we just talked about, the endangerment finding. The parts that I really did tab up of this book came in the final third part because it was the point where I was like, you're describing what I'm seeing occur before our very eyes. Like, I'm seeing examples of our government lying to us for the sake of keeping very specific groups in positions of power. This doesn't have to do with equality or equity. This has to do with money and power in both instances, in 1984 and in
Absolutely.
the example of the EPA that I just gave.
Yeah, absolutely. And they even they touch on this exact point in the book, actually, not in the lens of climate change, obviously, but they touch on how these kind of the system is built to maintain the hierarchy. So I think the way that this could be applied in the example you just gave is you need to basically enforce this type of doublethink in order for the EPA to even keep existing, in order for BP to keep exploring oil. Like, these corporations in the government, it is called the Environmental Protection Agency. How's that for newspeak? It is there to protect us from the exact thing it's not protecting us from. And it's built that way on purpose. It is, and now I don't even, honestly, the origins of the EPA are already shady, but like, it's already shady. Origins of the EPA, Nixon era United States, already shady. Like, we don't even need to go into that rabbit hole. Point being, this hierarchy of power is maintained from this type of communication and this type of propaganda. That's what it is. The manipulation of communication in order to achieve a certain result. We wouldn't see the pyramid like this so vividly if it weren't for the exact systems and forces of which they're perpetuating with their actions. I mean, it's so clear when it's like written for you like that. Thank you, Orwell, but it's also, it's kind of devastating, isn't it? Like, it's like, well,
Yeah.
Now we get into the question of, well, what actually matters? Like, how do we isolate the pieces that can be useful for, I guess, we can call it the rebellion, but whatever we want to call it, the movement toward actually, like, justice,
Equality, equity,
but justice for justice for the people. This is the
Yeah.
way that the way the system is built is to benefit primarily and pretty much solely this piece of the pyramid up here. That being, at present, it's essentially industry and corporation as they contribute to and influence politics. So also government. And then, all the rest of us are down here based on, the hierarchy, which very much exists, by the way.
Yeah, that's for sure. And part of this control and part of the themes that I would say, like, or I guess like Winston discusses, he knows the how the party stays in power. He knows like what they do to maintain their control, but he doesn't understand why. It's like a really big theme in the book is like,
I flagged that as well.
Why do some people need to have power and others need to have no power? Why do we have to have this severe imbalance? And I think that is a really important question for us to ask ourselves in today's day and age. Like, as Orwell writes, why should human equality be averted? Why do we feel this need to make some people suffer in the name of others excelling? Like, we are an advanced society. Why are we doing that even today?
He answers this, doesn't he? He answers this in the form of basically the educated masses serve as a threat to that top. When you educate the masses and you give them the tools and the freedom of thought, they will realize that there is no point to that top class. No point being like, sure, okay, everyone has a right to exist. The point that Orwell makes is there's no point in the class system necessarily itself. What benefit does it serve? So what do? They create that benefit in
Yep.
with perpetual war. And what that does is it makes you have to ration resources and, of course, ration ability and access to education due to that.
Yeah.
And,
What education? There's like no education in 1984. Kids go
well,
to spy camp, basically.
and what this does now too is if you're constantly in war, you're constantly, in a place of exploiting resources. Now and then you tell the story of like, oh no, our resources are being exploited, or oh no, our freedom is at stake, or our security is at stake. Then you're willingly giving the control to the people that you think are going to help, because that is the rhetoric, that
Yes.
is the story. So I would argue that today, those people that are going to help are the people with access to money and mad technology. Let's think Bezos, let's think Musk, because they have the ability to create super weapons and the ability to protect us from all this. The government literally contracts these people to make us cool spaceships and weapons. Like, and we do it willingly because they're the protectors. What can we do? I don't have the resources to build crazy technology. That's the idea. You willingly handing over the power to them because you don't know any better. Like, in the Orwellian story.
But
I mean, I think it's
today,
applicable. It's applicable today.
what this boils down to is this idea that whoever controls the narrative, or excuse me, whoever controls the language surrounding the narrative controls the narrative, and they control how people go about their day-to-day. Like, the party created a simplified language, newspeak. It's like the whole idea of newspeak is to suppress critical thought. If you take away people's ability to even be able to describe, let alone think of dissenting ideas, without the words to express your dissatisfaction, how would you tell others that you're dissatisfied, or even tell yourself that you're dissatisfied?
You don't. How do you even know what dissatisfaction is? Sometimes we don't even know what
Ungood.
that is. Ungood. You're not even able to express that, not just because of the lack of language or the lack of ability to critical think, but because we're kept so, like, similar to the proles, we're kept satisfied with basic things like media and entertainment, and we're fed and we focus on sex and things that are just like surface level distracting, right? So that we
Immediate gratification.
Immediate
I can order
gratification.
something on Amazon right now, and it can be
Yes.
at my doorstep in 24 hours. I can order as much clothing as I want off of fast fashion brand websites, and just
Go to Uber
But
Eats
it's
and
also
gorge
like,
yourself. Like, I mean, or the
yeah,
access to, again, I do bring up sex because it's something that I think, like,
yeah,
sexualization and focus on sex through media, through porn, through this. I'm not saying it's not human nature. It absolutely is, and it's
no, it
that's
is.
my point being is, like, it is used as almost, it's so gross. It can be used as a weapon against us to keep us focused and distracted while serious things are happening over here. Like, it is.
And they talk about it
It's
in 1984.
weaponized.
Like, an aim of theirs is it, like, not even an aim. They have begun and are progressing towards, like, removing the natural aspects of sex and sexuality. Like, they want to obliterate the ability for people to climax. Like,
Yep.
it's very, I mean, we're not saying that is what's happening in today's day and age, but we are saying, like,
Some places.
there are some, yeah, very
Clitorectomies for
profound.
11-year-olds.
Yep,
Definitely happens,
very
people.
profound point. Very profound point, Ariana. Yep. Let me put my critical thinking cap back on and remember that the United States is not an island. What I would say, just like a last piece on controlling the narrative, is like, this can be directly compared to the language when used the language used when describing climate change. For example, simplifying such complex issues can limit the scope of discussion, making it harder to challenge the established narratives or even consider alternative approaches. Like, who hasn't heard of the putting ice in a glass of water and letting it melt? And people being like, see, climate change wouldn't cause the oceans to rise because the water level doesn't change when that happens. But that doesn't actually capture the problem. Like, that is a correct assertion.
Of
Ice
that
melting in water
circumstance.
of that circumstance, but that is way too simplified. That doesn't even begin to capture.
No.
You're talking about oranges, and we're talking like the actual conversation is apples.
Not even. It's like we're talking about this multiple species of trees and fruits, and then they're talking about an orange peel. Like, it's like so different. I'm like, and I have had the ice and water theory put on me before, and it's like it's in those moments you do feel damp and bleak and hopeless because it's just like, well, I don't even know where to go from here. Like, you are so far lost. You're not even considering the fact that most of the ice comes from land masses, so it goes into the water separately. How about the fact that we're dealing with saline water, which chemically is different than the water in your stupid tap glass, like the tap water in your glass. Like, honestly, like, I don't have the patience.
This is why education that talks about the impacts of climate change, which we are very readily experiencing, is so important. And I guess one final example, one nail in the coffin before I would really like to just talk about the threats of 1984 versus current day society. My last example of controlling the narrative and the language is the example of the carbon footprint. How is that not the most
Thank you. I was waiting for you to bring this up. Oh, what
of being it
BS.
Is up to us, the individuals, to control our carbon footprint, because that is the driver of climate change. Like, we're saying that climate change is happening because there's a carbon footprint, but simultaneously we're saying that emissions or burning fossil fuels is not the driver of climate change, because if that were true, then it would be the industry that is actually responsible for climate change.
Literally. And wasn't it BP?
I'm pretty sure it was BP.
Or Chevron who coined the term?
It was one of the two.
Naturally.
It was one of the two who were like, let's come up with this thing called
propaganda.
Your carbon footprint. Yeah, because if people feel personally responsible, then they won't go looking for another person to be mad at for this thing that is happening all around us. I think that actually brings us to the close of this conversation, which I would really love if we could just briefly talk about the nature of the threat in 1984 versus today, who the actors are in the threat of both of these instances.
Okay.
And then the overall, I guess, last thing I'd love if we could close with is the fears regarding objective reality versus subjective interpretation.
Okay. Interesting. Okay. Nature of the threat. What's your take?
I feel like the party in 1984 is the obvious threat from the party, or from Winston's perspective, because obviously the reversal is the party thinks that the people are the threat. But Orwell's description is that it's the oppressive government with the desire to keep those in power forever, no matter the cost. That's the threat, because what are you not willing to do to keep your power? And I think in today's sense, while some might say that in the context of climate change specifically, the threat is environmental crisis, I actually think that that's not the case.
I would agree, but carry on. Let's hear what you have to say.
I would say that the effects of climate change is only 10% of the true threat. The storms, the flooding, all of that jazz, the absolute obliteration of entire societies, because of climate change, that's actually not the big threat that the capital T threat that I think is responsible for 90% of the actual issues. I think it's actually almost the exact same as in 1984. It's people in power doing whatever it takes, no matter the cost, to stay in power. Period.
Thank you. I couldn't have said it better myself. I'm tired of hearing that the climate change is the threat. Climate change is the result of the threat. Climate change
Bingo.
is the direct effect of the cause, which is people making people being the people behind or driving the decisions of
global policy, basically, on fossil fuels.
Exactly, in the name of corporate interest and political interest, oftentimes working together. That's the threat, baby. These people making these decisions. Yeah, that's the threat. Climate change, let's take a step back. The environmental crisis, natural resources included, indigenous land colonization basically is all included in the environmental
water
crisis.
security, territory,
food security, access to resources, all of that, and climate change are under the environmental crisis umbrella, all of which are effects of certain decision making and certain policies and certain actions toward these general interests. That is the exact same thing that's happening here.
This is like quite literally what Orwell was warning about, because I think his book is a general warning regarding these topics. I don't think in his writing of this, he probably would have pictured that it would be the environmental crisis we're experiencing. I'm sure he could probably think of a million other things that would come up, but yeah. And the actors in this instance, I actually feel like are pretty similar between 1984 and today. What would you say?
Yeah, I mean, the party, I think the main difference, so in 1984 it would be like the party, it would be the centralized political regime, the centralized authoritarian entity, and then today we don't necessarily have that scale of global unified power, but what we do have is more of that kind of like is it oligarchical or oligarchical? The oligarchy that's existing now, which basically means like people with money and money behind corporations and certain industries, and that influence that it has over government and government decisions would be the main catalyst in those threats.
And that's kind of like sums up the fears regarding objective reality versus subjective interpretation, which is basically like the theme that comes up over and over and over again in 1984, as well as today. You talk about climate science, and it seems like people believe that there are two sides to this coin, and both are 50-50 in their truthfulness, but that's not necessarily the case. Like in 1984, we don't know what's true because the party dictates what's real and what's not. Like the idea of truth is warped, but that's not the case with climate change, right?
We have we have the science and we have the evidence supporting the reality of anthropogenic climate change. It's just not. I actually don't even think that's the main like question, and it shouldn't be anymore. In the climate change debate, still relies on, well, not just relies, but it still is like it's still such a dynamic conversation of even amongst like interpretations of the science. too, but maybe that's...
And people basically being like, oh, well, if I take this data set and I don't want to say manipulate, but
we may have
as
said
we saw
manipulate.
as we saw when the oil companies in the 70s pulled the data, their scientists were like, oh, this is going to cause global problems. But they didn't tell people. And now it's like, I mean, I could get into the Al Gore of it all, but I think we've said what we needed to say.
What an enlightened conversation. The way we wanted to do this book club, the way we've set it up is that we do a little listener Q&A and feedback at the very end of the recording. Now, we have a few questions from book club participants that we would love to answer at this part of the discussion. So a couple of them were repetitive, so we kind of just narrowed it down into 4.
All right, Ariana. So first question that we got was, why did O'Brien give Winston and Julia the book if he was a loyal party member all along? That's a great question.
That's a really good one. Okay, well, I think this was, just a way to establish trust and to show him to show him the truth was kind of an essential part of O'Brien being seen as like a trusted Brotherhood member. And I actually think it was essential to inevitably breaking Winston at the end, because he built up this hope and he finally understood what it was all about. And the break is so much harder when you actually know what's happening and you still become a loyal party member at the end.
Yeah.
I feel like it was for the intensity of it all, like, and to establish trust between O'Brien and Winston and Julia.
Yeah, and I think you're so right. The last like snippet I would add to that is O'Brien literally says that they don't just like cull the people who dissent. They bring them to the other side. And I think if Julia and Winston hadn't found the Brotherhood, they would have just continued probably like in perpetuity pursuing it, like having hope that it existed.
Yeah.
And O'Brien giving the book gave them the like thing to hold on to, just to like literally smash it into smithereens and be like, it never existed anyways.
Yep.
Like that broke.
Yeah.
That broke them.
Good point. Good point.
I have another question for you.
Okay.
Let me see which one I want to ask you though. I already know who your favorite character is, so I'm not going to ask that. Actually, no, I'm not going to ask you that one. It's a little too on the nose for who you are as a person. Ooh, what do you think Orwell actually values from utopian society that is essential to not finding ourselves in the 1984 reality?
Wow.
These are good questions.
Such good questions. Okay, so if I think about Orwell himself, I think he cares and values most privacy above all, and particularly privacy of thought and protection of individual thought, expression of individuality, and the expression of freedom of speech and difference of opinion. I think those are like some of the essential like ingredients to Orwellian utopia. But I'm interested to hear what you think.
I echo exactly what you said, and I would add that my cat is yelling at me. I would add I actually think being able to allow people to hold and experience their own autonomy so long as I was gonna add like a caveat is like so long as it doesn't hurt other people, but I feel like that should be self-explanatory.
Yeah.
Like allowing ideas to be able to coexist is really important, but also giving space for them to I don't know.
No, I think that lands.
I guess like and if not that, I don't know if I really like that. I don't think that response really adds anything. I guess my only other addition would be I think Orwell valued equality. And I know if there's like a very current conversation about equality versus equity, let's give a nod to equity. Like not all people are given the same like starting point, and that should matter in terms of like what they receive to support them. But just in the terms of equality, because eventually that's like the goal of equity, right, is to make us all equal. I think that is something that Orwell really valued and is essential to us not finding ourselves in a 1984 reality. Like recognizing that my freedom of expression is not more important than your freedom of expression.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I want to add, this isn't a listener question, but I almost want to ask if you think that is possible.
Yes. Delusionally, maybe, but
Well,
yeah.
that's what I was going to say. I was like,
think
of
it is
course,
possible.
of course, I think this is, I'm answering my own question. Sorry. I know that our video editor hates when I do that. But yeah, obviously, like, what the hell else are we doing here if you're not working toward a goal of the utopian future? Like, sorry, like, okay.
Boring.
Ask me how boring. Ask me how delusional I am. I'm fun though. Okay.
She's a real good time.
Real good time. Okay, last two questions from listeners. Who is your favorite character?
I'm really racking my brain.
It's okay.
It's not that
Whoever
it's hard for me to say like it's so hard to say like who was my favorite because I found all of them somewhat unlikable.
Yeah.
But I think if I had to pick just one, I think unfortunately Mr. Charrington.
Oh my
Like
god, I know.
who the idea of him was, not who he actually turned out to be, because I definitely was really holding out hope that he could exist
I know.
in this
I
timeline.
was so
like that's why he was my
excited.
favorite. Like the idea for him to be able to exist and have his shop and have that like little oasis above his shop was so appealing. That was my favorite. That like made him my favorite character.
Until he wasn't.
Yeah. And I know who yours is, but I haven't heard all of the why. So
Mine is Syme. And I think because I don't know, I relate to Syme. I feel like I would be that dumbass, like just trying to prove how smart I was and like trying to rip off all the facts I know and like be like, oh my god, like I figured out the philosophy behind Big Brother. Like let me tell you about what the inner workings of the party are about. And I would get myself freaking vaporized, like just because I'm a goddamn know-it-all. That would be me. Like
it's so disheartening though. Like it has to be. You should be able to be like, look, I get it, I understand it. Like you're lulled into this safety just to be.
That's the thing that sucks so much about Syme's character is that he was excited for the party. Like, in a way, he was like,
Yes.
oh my god, like, because
He loved them.
Well, and he was working on the Newspeak dictionary, like 11th edition, and he was just like so excited to like figure it out and be working on this awesome project for the party. And although his implications were anti-party, like, anytime you say any of that shit again, like about the party, it's technically against the party, but he was so excited about his work and what he was doing and just so animated about it. It was just sad. Like I was like, well, and I mean, just like as I said, Syme he just cracks me up because he who else would be that know-it-all, like just yapping away, getting themselves killed? Like that would be me. Like
poor Syme.
Oh yeah, I do love
I was
Simon.
sad when he was vaporized. TBH.
I
Oh,
wanted better for Syme. And fuck Winston
yeah.
for getting annoyed with Syme. Like, go away. No one likes you, Winston. Nasty.
He has such a superiority complex. It makes me
Oh,
so mad. I'm like, you're doing the same thing privately. Like,
I
this should have
know.
been your friend. This should have been someone that you were like, wow, we actually like
We're
are
pals.
critical thinkers
I
in a
know.
world without them.
I know. He was sad, I think, when Syme got vaporized too.
Yeah.
Okay, last question. This one is so good, and I've got such a freaking animated response to this, but let's ask. I mean, as per usual, I'm the Syme in this case. Like, I'm getting vaporized. But do you think Winston ever really loved Julia, or was it just a form of rebellion?
I don't think so. I don't think so. I don't even think it was just a form of rebellion. I think it was a lot of convenience between the two of them. I think she might have loved him, maybe. Maybe I'm just being like, honestly, that might be a little like patronistic of me, honestly. A little sexist maybe of a take. So I will reflect on that. No one come for me. But I don't think he ever really loved her, especially just I think his whole thing was he loved the idea of the rebelling, like the rebelling. And I I think the part for me that like kind of sealed that he didn't love her was when he was so into reading the book to her and explaining all of these things. Like he loved that. He reveled in that, and she did not care. Like it was never about that for her. And I think that even if he didn't say it or like even think it through Orwell's words, I don't think he ever really loved her.
Damn girl. Damn
Now
girl.
you. Tell me, tell me, tell me, tell me.
No, straight up, I have the exact same opinion. I was like, and actually, I even pulled the same pieces, like the same examples from the book. Like when he was reading the Brotherhood like book to her, and she just falling asleep and straight up not giving a flying frick. And he even mentioned in it, he's like, it's not that he said that he was annoyed, but you could just tell. You could just tell. Orwell is so talented. You could feel Winston's annoyance with her. You could feel it that he was so annoyed at her ignorance. Like, and he would get annoyed when she wouldn't understand something, because to her none
Mm-hmm.
of it mattered. To her it was all bullshit. To her it was
It was
like,
all fun. It
yeah.
was fun and games.
Well,
Like,
and to her, she's like, well, it's all bullshit anyway. I know when to be in support and when to not be in support, and that's all I need to know. I don't need to know the
yeah.
minutia of the party. And
I don't need to know who invented the airplane.
I just need to know which side to fight on, was kind of like her thing. And I think I do think he was in love with the idea of what the relationship with her represented more than anything. I think he just loved, I do think he loved her by extension. Like, I just don't think he was in love with her. I never got in love vibes. He even says like in the book that she wasn't that pretty. Like he's like, she's not beautiful. Like she kind of annoyed me, or like all this stuff. And as we said at the top, like I mean his initial thoughts of her were kind of violent. Not kind of,
Yeah.
were straight up
Were.
violent, and hateful. And I do think he loved what they represented. I think he loved that he was finally participating in some way in the rebellion, and in a way he loved her by extension. And I think that's also clear in that it was Julia in the end that the betrayal of her that broke him. But again, I think that's still represented in the betrayal of individual thought rather than like the betrayal of Julia herself. Like betraying her,
100%.
he betrayed his ability to hold on to something that was his, not Julia.
Yes.
Like,
Yes.
so
He betrayed the freedom that he had only when they were like his outward freedom of expression. That's what he betrayed. by betraying her.
Yeah.
I think that that's all I think she was honestly like a pretty minor figure, if I can say that. Like, I think she was a pretty minor figure actually in the overall story.
Yeah.
And she was supposed to be like the embodiment of his freedom of expression.
Yep, I would agree with that. That's a hot take.
And then he betrayed it.
People might come at us for that, but I'm not gonna go as far to say
I welcome it.
she was an NPC, but like, I don't think she was an NPC. I mean, I just think she was definitely. It could have been anyone or anything. It wasn't Julia. It wasn't Julia.
But that's kind of my point. That's kind of why I feel like she might be an NPC, because it could have been. It helped that they could be somewhat romantic, I think, for the storytelling purposes. But in reality, could that role have been played by a best friend? Could that same role have been played by O'Brien and still had basically
interesting.
almost the same effect? Because I actually, and this is like a little digressing, but I questioned Winston's like sexuality throughout the book, just based on the way that he admired O'Brien. I felt like it would not have surprised me if he actually was in love with O'Brien. But again, I think that a lot of this was like the characters outside of Winston were supposed to embody things that Winston wanted, not necessarily that they were main characters in the plot of it all. Yeah. Anywho. I could spend a lot of time talking about that. So if anyone wants to chat about it offline, you know where to find us.
We are here. The book club is there to build community, so we want to have the conversations about it. Anyway, that was a hell of a conversation. Thanks for listening. We hope you stay tuned for the next book club installment. That will be announced soon shortly, of course, on hoteller360.com. and on Instagram and our newsletter. So if you want to be kept up to date with book club knowings and updates, then please go sign up for our newsletter on our website. It's a tab on its own called newsletter. So pretty easy to find. Anyway, thank you guys for listening, and we will see you guys soon.
Yes. Bye.